好，那我们就要开始今天的专题讲座。各位大家好，午安，我是关渡美术馆的助理研究员王小华。那仅代表关渡美术馆欢迎也感谢大家在周六的午后，而且是2024年的第一个周末的午后，来到关渡美术馆参与今天的科技艺术典藏基础计划的专题讲座。那这个计划呢是由独立的研究者陈宇先所主持，由数位艺术基金会所支持的计划，目前已经来到了计划执行的第4期。关渡美术馆非常荣幸的可以从2021年开始，也就是第3期加入这个计划的团队，针对特别是媒体艺术在保存跟管理上面的工作。那么延续第3期是以档案化作为创作的工具，技术的典藏为主。当时呢是透过了讲座和实务工作坊的形式，来针对关渡美术馆所馆藏的录像艺术作品进行一些在典藏管理和保存维护方面的讨论。今天的这一场专题讲座呢，作为我们第4期的成果的发表，将会聚焦在从媒体艺术的修复师和收藏机构之间的协作经验，来讨论媒体艺术呢在保存修复的这个实务工作上面所经历的过程，和可能在过程当中可能会面对到的问题。今天这一场其实是专业度跟知识性含金量都非常高的专题讲座，会首先由计划主持人宇先，还有国际交流主任子权现在也在线上会先就这个计划执行了4年下来所进行的工作以及一些成果的回顾，来揭开我们今天专题讲座的序幕。那专题讲座的第2场呢，则会由我们的典藏展览组馆内的典藏展览组的组员谢宜桦来进行主讲。宜桦呢将会分析在特别是第4期和科技艺术典藏基础计划所工作的过程当中，针对我们馆内的媒体艺术作品所进行的一些相关的实例的分析。而第3、第4场的这个语谈呢，我们则很荣幸的可以邀请到实基媒体艺术保存顾问 Mr. Andrews 和媒体艺术修护师 Mr. Alexandra， 他们在线上以线上发表的方式呢，来和我们分享他们2位和外部的专家以及博物馆等等机构之间的一些合作的经验，以及他们所会提出的一些经验上面的观察。我想今天其实在场的与会的朋友们很多应该都是艺术领域的专业者，无论我们是身为创作者、研究者，或者是各位的身份就是媒体艺术的保存或者是维护工作领域的工作者。我想大家对于艺术无非就是创造某种崭新的时空这件事情，应该是会蛮有感应的。那我想呢，宇先所主持的这个科技艺术典藏的这个基础计划，其实好像又把艺术在进行这个崭新的时空创造这件事情，似乎又在往前更推进了一些，推进到艺术作品要如何去贯穿时间和空间，或者是说如何在时间和空间之中 keeping flash， 也就是今天我们的专题讲座的主标题保鲜术这件事情。那今天其实除了刚刚提到的这个4场精彩的语谈之外呢，我们也预留了很多的时间，希望可以和现场的各位进行交流和讨论。所以其实稍待在市场的这个语谈的过程当中，如果大家有什么想法、问题或是想分享的观点，其实可以透过我们前面的这个便利贴、原子笔把问题写下来，然后就提供给我们。也期待等一下在4场的语谈之后呢，能够和大家有很多交流和分享的机会。那接下来我就会把麦克风交给我们的计划主持人宇先，谢谢。
大家好，我是雨贤。首先非常感谢就是关渡美术馆馆长啊，还有馆员们一直以来的支持。那现场跟线上的朋友下午好，就欢迎大家来参加作品保鲜术收藏机构与外部时基媒体艺术修护师的双向交流。那诚如刚刚小华所介绍的，我们这个计划其实是在2018年的时候最早就成立，然后前面先进行了2期，是后来一直到第3、第4期的时候才开始有机会跟关渡美术馆这边来合作。那其实据我自己所知啦，包含子权那边他所知道，这个计划它依然是民间唯一一个在台湾是聚焦于媒体艺术保存的一种研究型的计划。那其实我们特别关注的是媒体艺术它的永续保存在台湾有怎么样子的发展的可能性。那大家应该有注意到，其实我们一开始讲座是写说全部会使用英文进行，那所以我等一下很快就会切换到英文的这个 channel， 然后为了让大家能够更快速的能够去理解内容，那我们前面也有准备了中英文都有的这个等一下大家的简报内容的中英文，然后所以在正式开始之前，我也想要特别感谢我们后面来自数位艺术基金会的我们的直播设备小组，对，然后感谢他们一直以来在这个计划当中，然后给予我们非常专业的这个直播的设备跟服务。Okay, so thank you everyone. I will switch to English channel now. So without further ado, let's welcome the first set of speaker. We have Ziquan Lin online and also myself.Titled 4 Years of the Safe Media Project, Opportunity and Restriction from the Field of Taiwan. So as introduced, the Safe Media Art Project has run for 4 years.Differing from most of the preservation project by other museum institutions abroad, the Safe Media Project doesn't fit into a particular artwork and not a particular institution in the beginning. It is rather an emerge from the observation and question raised of the two members while us having our own professional development. So I will call it is a platform for knowledge exchange and exploring the possibility of the development of time-based media art preservation in the field of Taiwan. To begin with, since 2006, Taiwan has seen a flourishing development in media art. So art museums in Taiwan also respond by steadily increasing their collection of such artworks, as you could see on the slides.And recently, we also have a booming of trend to build a new city-based museum of art, such as Tainan Art Museum, New Taipei City Art Museum, and even Taoyuan Museum of Art. They all stating that media art is an integral part of their acquisition plan. So the issue of preservation was also first introduced in 2006. Firstly, through the Pompidou Center New Media Art Exhibition at the Taipei Fine Art Museum,where their curators actually share their challenge of preservation issue of their collections. And later in 2013, the same museum invited Joanna Phillips. She was a former Guggenheim Media Art Preservation, and she led a workshop on contemporary art conservation in Taiwan. Also, the Art Expo in Taipei had the executive director of DKM,to discuss their sustainable preservation of their media collection. However, despite such occasional events or forums, there was a lack of long-term research over the last decades. The Safe Media Art Project, to our knowledge, remains the only ongoing project that lasts more than a year. But maybe good news is that the recent year, the Taipei Fine Art Museum, with its plan for a new gallery and storage expansion, has initiated collaboration with other Taiwanese media art conservators working abroad and could potentially influence other museums to launch a more related project and increase funding in the future. On the other hand, the time-based media art in Taiwan appears to still be very thriving. There hasn't been much change in the funding structure of this project over the past 4 years. Our financial support are 90%, mostly from the National Cultural and Arts Foundation from their annual grant, which they mostly support cultural projects that can be completed annually. And at the same time, the Digital Art Foundation provided us a general infrastructure for running the project, such as event venue, recording, live streaming, translation, article publication, and distribution. For example, for today and after today's events, they will also help us editing all the material and translation and upload to the YouTube channel. And in terms of the project focus, in the beginning, we heavily rely on the Digital Art Foundation's resources, following their focus on the virtual reality technology. So we created an VR emulation edition of a past artwork and worked with VR engineers at the Digital Art Foundation. And through this first project, we also held numerous lectures, forums, and similar activities. Returning to the origin of the project, what is our motivation? We actually keep asking ourselves the same question. Back to 2015 to 2018, both myself and Ziquan, we all work at the Collection Management Department of the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Art. Together, we organized the International Symposium Collecting and Exhibiting Media Arts. This event marked another significant milestone in Taiwan's art preservation history. Additionally, we also led 2 conservation projects for the display of 2 collections with an external multimedia engineer. We also took the initiative to organize master files and related documents of the video and media art collection, providing suggestions for the acquisition process and actively participating in the acquisition process. We also conduct pre-acquisition interview with artists and start to document essential informations. Among the mentioned tasks, while the symposium and preparation of the 2 works were being supervised, other activities were considered as a very basic duty and there were no formal administrative procedure or enforcement. At the time, our knowledge of media art preservation was still in the very beginning of learning by doing, and it wasn't clear who was responsible for overseeing and preserving media artwork within the museum in Taiwan. And after the symposium, we had a casual conversation with the director and chairman of the Digital Art Foundation, and that chat actually became the birth of the Safe Media project. And soon after the establishment of the project, myself and Ziquan, we both left the National Museum of Fine Art for our own persuasion. And the Safe Media project officially became our side project. For myself, I later gained my media art preservation expertise in various settings, such as M+ Museum in Hong Kong, Taipei Fine Art Museum, Museum of Modern Art, and Rizon in New York City. And I also participated in workshops organized by MoMA and Voice in contemporary art institutions. Meanwhile, Ziquan later pursued further study at the State Academy of Fine Art in Stuttgart, Germany, an internship at the Kunstsammlung NRW, DKM Center for Art and Media Casserole, also Lima, a media art institution in the Netherlands, during his study. Following his graduation, Ziquan returned to work at the Kunstsammlung. So now let's delve into the collaboration with the关渡Museum of Fine Art. Firstly, thanks to the Digital Art Foundation, their long-standing efforts in Taiwan's digital art field and established connections allow us to receive full support from the museum's director, Huang Jianhong. Also, we continue to independently seek funding from the National Cultural and Art Foundation so that the关渡Museum did not need to spend any expense for their contribution and participation in our project. In short, the关渡Museum offered their collections and museum space, while the Digital Art Foundation act as a bridge between both parties, and we ourselves act as an outside professionals start to work on the collection of关渡Museum. So, the Guangdong Museum of Fine Art is a university museum that primarily collects donations from the faculty, students of the established artists in Taiwan, and also works that previously exhibited in the museum. However, the museum faced a significant constraint in terms of manpower resources, which shows a decreasing trend annually. As a part of an educational institution, Guangdong Museum is unfortunately do not have the legal right to apply for many domestic grants designed to support private organizations on their own. And later, I believe Yihua from the museum will share more details on this. As a result, we need to tailor the conservation strategy with practical solutions for the Guangdong Museum. We set up principles such as to complete tasks within the existing human resources, integrating new tasks as much as possible with their existing workload, and identifying advantages that considering the tight connection between the museum and the university.
So we have completed 2 phases of the project, namely the 3rd and 4th phases, each in collaboration with different museum staff. During the 3rd phase in 2021, our primary focus was on formulating media guidelines, utilizing the use of the current collection management system according to the museum's requirements for sustainable documentation of time-based media work. Our main task involved investigating 43 video and video installations donated to museum after the early Taiwanese video art exhibition in 2015. These works have a special HC edition, which the museum does not have access to master tapes or archival files. We conducted condition assessments and managed information for these sets of works, and identified 18 pieces recommended for further investigation. We also selected 3 collections in terms of different files formats and artistic forms for full audiovisual condition assessment. In 2023, we further optimized the museum's fundamental infrastructure. From interviewing museum staff, we established guidelines for the acquisition process and management of collections, such as how to structure a folder and where to store digital files and documents based on the scale of the collections. During this period, there was an opportunity to interview an artist, Yuan Guangming, whose earliest works were displayed at the Art and Technology Center, also situated in university. Together with museum staff, we complete the iteration report for the work. Due to our commitments, Yuxian was only able to spend half to a whole day per week at the museum, totaling around 4 months. Yuxian conducted observation on site and communicated online with me every 2 weeks with her field observation. As for audiovisual files, we were able to review metadata and web form together despite being in different locations. So next page, please. As Yuxian mentioned earlier, we have compiled online resources from various European and American museums and create a template for video condition assessment reports to be used by the Chinese-speaking community. This template was also used to inspect 3 video artworks at Guangdong Museum, conforming its usability and adjusting accordingly. In the workshop planning section, we incorporate our own experiences and knowledge into the workshop. I adopt the knowledge I gained in Germany into teaching materials on the history of video technology and preservation methods for analog media. Yuxian introduced the process of registering works for collection and the methods for digital file preservation based on her personal work experience and collaboration with the Guangdong Museum. This program allows participants to understand video technology and carrier media, and further explore how carriers store and respond to digital files. Eventually, a group workshop was held for participants to simulate the situation when the video work enters the collection. From the process of registering the work's data, evaluating the audio-visual files of the work, organizing the complete documentation, and then being able to conduct compiling interviews with the artist based on an in-depth understanding of the premise.
The donated collections, for the most part, have a close relationship to the history of the museum, which provide increased opportunities for artist interviews. If the collected works were being exhibited at the museum during the acquisition period, it is actually a very great opportunity for archival documentation and artist interviews alongside the work on display. Regarding the background of the museum staff, while many of them are trained as curator or artists at the department within the university, I noticed that they both show profound interest in delving deeper into the analysis of artworks. Maybe because they already have experience in contemporary art creation, exhibition production, or curation. So compared to traditional museum staff, it seems to be easier for them to appreciate the complexity of the need for time-based media preservation. On the other hand, the limitation of manpower, on the other hand, could be seen as an advantage too. For example, Yi Hua, she served as an exhibition officer and a collection manager at the same time. Being responsible on both ends eliminate a lot of communication and foster a better understanding of the needs. Moreover, this dual roles allows for a broader perspective in the possibility, not just in curating collections, but also in the comprehensive aspect of preservation and the maintenance of the works.
So thanks to the strong connection between media art and technology and the development of the internet, we can carry out these projects from different countries, arranging on-site and online hybrid lectures and inviting conservators and scholars in Europe and the US to share their experience and research. Simultaneously, we introduce and translate international media art preservation-related resources to the public in Taiwan, the most notable of which was the translation of the Matters in Media Art website. Taiwan is comparatively late to Europe and the US in developing media art and video art, which has led a delay in the concern for preservation and intermittent discussion of related issues. Therefore, by introducing resources and localization programs, we can enhance the knowledge of the media preservation in Taiwan and further adjust it in a way that can be applied locally. The Safe Media Project, as a privately run third-party group, has observed from our background and experiments that most major art museums domestically have recognized the issue of media art preservation, yet lack a dedicated staff capable of dealing with this issue particularly. Although these museums are relatively resourceful and have a clear division of expertise, if preservation of media art is not considered to be primary priority of the museums, it is easy for the preservation of such artworks to be postponed, and they are often not examined again until the next exhibit opportunity. Such a situation is actually common in the most domestic and overseas art museums. Small and medium-sized museums like the关渡Museum have a relatively flat organizational structure and may need a full-time staff dedicated to media artworks. However, we have seen their strengths in executing our collaborative projects. The organization's high feasibility in communication, coupled with the increased mobility of the museum staff, makes it easier to establish a closer partnership in the process. Next page, please. So we have arranged a website showcasing our old projects' achievements over the last 4 years. This website uses Notion's database function and contains several significant achievements, such as online publication, video recordings of all lectures and interviews, and a glossary of video terminologies. Users can easily find content by category, and we have also created an English version for presenting the outcomes to international organizations and researchers. After this lecture, we will continue to update the contents of this project. In Taiwan, while media art exhibitions and lectures are thriving, only a few directly address preservation issues. However, there has always been a growing demand for media art preservation. For example, a Taiwanese studio specializing in mechanical and technical innovation has begun to provide maintenance services to cooperating artists and other clients. Similarly, I have personally observed that well-established artists and their studio in Europe and the US has raised considerable concerns about the preservation of their works and have provided ways to deal with them. Even in my surrounding, some artist friends are beginning to pay attention to the documentation of their works, particularly their past ones. After 4 years of developing the project, we have seen gradual increase in its potential audience and have frequently wondered whether there are other possibilities for development besides collaboration with museums. Yuxian also observed the current dilemma in Taiwan, where the role of institutional curators is detached from the traditional curatorial work outside Taiwan, leading to a lack of dedicated personnel responsible for the sustainable preservation of artworks on the collection premise. Consequently, it becomes more challenging to promote cross-disciplinary media preservation initiatives within the hierarchical structure of art museums. Based on the above reflections, we should not only focus on the relationship with museums, but also expand the scope of preservation, go beyond the established framework, and bring in different perspectives to promote a broader range of communication possibilities. In the foreseeable future, curators, artists, technicians, even art critics or other professionals can be linked more optimally so that these different professional fields can be brought together for cooperation. Yuxian and I recently had a discussion about future developments. We have come to an agreement to work on developing a mid to long-term plan that will span over 3 to 5 years. The plan will begin with a general outline and will be further divided into yearly goals. Our aim is to collaborate with professionals from various fields, researchers, and universities related to art to enhance the multidimensional development of media art preservation in Taiwan. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the end of our presentation, and due to the time, I will now next to introduce our next speaker. 那感谢大家，刚刚这是我跟子权我们2个人关于计划的一个 review。那因为时间的关系，所以我现在马上介绍我们下一位讲者。然后上半场如果有要 Q&A 的话，我们就在进入中场休息的时间，如果还有剩的话，我们就上半场的一起来做 Q&A。那在我身边宜桦，他是毕业于国立台北艺术大学的跨域研究所创作组。那他从事的是，那你自己调一下你的镜头，我等一下把它切换那个 PDF。他现在是关渡美术馆展览组加典藏组的专员。那我在这几个月的期间，一直都是跟宜桦很密切的一起在做互动跟工作。那我们就也一起经历了馆内袁广明老师，如果在台湾大家都知道这位艺术家很早期很知名的作品《立位》的一个题介跟艺术家访谈。那我们现在就欢迎宜桦。Please wait for me to set up her presentation.
Hello everyone, I am Yi Hua, a member of the exhibition team at the关渡Museum, Taipei National University of the Arts. Today I would like to share with you that what I have learned from working with the SMA project at the museum. As a non-specialist collections professional, my experience has been both fundamental and refreshing. My talk will be in 2 parts. The first part will provide an introduction to the collection environment at the关渡Museum, while the second part will focus on my experience with the loaned collection item out of position for the past year. As mentioned earlier, I didn't take any courses related to the collections. I studied fine arts at the university and later entered the Graduate Institute of Transdisciplinary Arts. During my academic journey, I was involved in performance and printmaking. My graduation thesis focused on personal prose writing. Since joining the关渡Museum, I have been primarily responsible for exhibition matters, including equipment management, allocation to staff for exhibition preparation, and communication with artists regarding technical aspects. On the other hand, I also deal with collection-related tasks, such as the annual inventory and the management of loans. As the关渡Museum is a small art institute, team members often assist each other in a flexible and collaborative way. For example, when it comes to collection-related tasks, I am responsible for the routine inventory, while a colleague from the education department assists me with activities such as loaning out collection items and conducting regular inspections of the storage rooms. Getting back to my work with the collection, the collaboration with the SMA and the关渡Museum has given me the opportunity to acquire a wealth of knowledge about media art collections. Last year, Yuxian visited the museum every week to check on any problems I was having with the collection. She told me how to check the data in the artworks files and help us set up a practical archival framework. And the amount of the关渡Museum collection is 2008. Sorry. And the video art is 66. And this is the place we place the video art CD. Okay. There are 3 warehouses in the关渡Museum, and we place the installation and video in the storage room number 1 and some of the installation in storage room number 3. And this is the environment. The wood drawer, we placed some printmaking and some sculpture and installation on the floor. And this is also the storage room number 1. And there is the we place the CD. Okay, this is the storage room number 3, which where we place the installation on the rack. Also the storage room number 3. Okay, and most of the collection are from this exhibition, Rewind Video Art in Taiwan, 1983 to 1999. And this exhibition was in 2015. The exhibition is based on the journal Art Critic of Taiwan 50 Nights, and the title is In the Twilight, Taiwanese Video Art Since the 1980s. And then the curator, based on this journal, the curator curated the Rewind in 2015. And this is the curator, Xin Songyong. And he writes the article in when he curated this art exhibition. He said, in general, Rewind Video Art in Taiwan, 1983 to 1999, is not so much a retrospective exhibition as a fantastic journey across the histories of video art in Taiwan by way of imagination. And when I see this sentence, I think it's really interesting because he said it's by the way of imagination, not just recreates the same works, but consider with the background of Taiwan in 2015 and the technique. Yes. Okay. Last year, the Center for Arts and Technology building opened in. This building is also in TNUA, and they borrowed one of our collections out of position. They applied to us to borrow this work, and this work is made by Yuan Guangming, who also teach in TNUA. These are some photos when we install the work. And Yu Xian teach me to finish the iteration report, which including the construction notes, technical notes, space as installed, and the size of the image. The out of position was made in 1987 and is composed with single channel video, a CRT monitor, and a sculpture. And it was recently exhibited in the CAT building and in the关渡Museum. And other institutions that collect out of positions are the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts and the M+ in Hong Kong. Yu Xian and I conduct an interview with Yuan Guangming about considerations for the future maintenance of the artworks for this exhibition. We learned that the artist may need to make adjustments or replacements depending on the condition of the work, including number 1, the reproduction of the sculpture, number 2, the replacements of the CRT, and number 3, file migration. And this is the reproduction of the sculpture. Since the sculpture's mold made in 2015 didn't retain, so the artist used the 1987 sculpture to remake a mold and then make the sculpture for the 2015 exhibition. And in the future, if the human body sculpture is damaged, the professionals will be hired to repair it because the mold made during the 2015 remake was not retained. So the professional will use the sculpture made in 2015. And the replacements of the CRT monitor, we have two methods to replace it. And the first one is to use the same TV casing to install the LED screen inside it. And the second is to, without using the same TV, directly replace it with a CRT monitor with similar proportions and make a suitable metal bracket. And the video migration. Both methods allow restorers to adjust the image ratio so that 4:3 images can be played on the 16:9 screen. When adjusting the image, please note that the outline of the swimmer's abdomen in the image must be as connected as possible to the outline of the sculpture's abdomen. It is okay if the image near the bottom of the TV is slightly deformed. And this is the difference between the 2015 and 2023. In 2015, there are some mirror fragments on the metal plate below the TV. And the 2023, because the shadow of the TV covers the base, so the artist doesn't place mirror fragments. And we come to the conclusion. These are some of the benefits of working with the SMA project over the past year. In the beginning, when I encountered problems with the collection, I often felt unsure and had to rely on my imagination to figure out what to do. In the course of working with Yuxian, I was a little surprised to learn that the iteration report also included in interviews with artists, highlighting the flexibility of research within this archival document. In addition, Yuxian emphasized the importance of the Guangdong Museum establishing a viable collection structure, taking into account the museum's existing resources to ensure that the system could be used in the future. In the course of our dialogue, I have come to understand the ethics of collecting, and I'm grateful to the SMA project and to Yuxian for her expertise. 好，然后我用中文简短的讲一下结论，就是好，这比较口语一点，就是我在跟Yuxian合作的这个期间，就是因为他都在我的桌子旁边，他都在我桌子旁边教我一些典藏的事情，就比方说要怎么样看一个作品的数据，或是你要用仿写盒，那个资讯可能它才不会不见，不会突然不见。然后在他传授给我的这些知识，还有他都是告诉我说这些事要怎么做，然后我就看到他示范了这个典藏的伦理，然后我就觉得很感动，就是我就亲眼见证了一个专业伦理在我面前建立这样，然后我觉得 过往因为我过去是创作背景，然后我过去好像比较少这样的经验，就是说，伦理它就是要建立在充足的知识上面。好 ，Thank you for the listening， 谢谢。
Thank you for 宜华's presentation 啊，感谢宜华的给带来这么实务经验的，还有好听的也有点感动的总结这样子。Because we still have about 10 minutes to the 15-minute break, so does anyone want to ask question or feedbacks for the first two presentation? 可以用中文也可以用英文，都可以。对，那不知道现场有没有观众？宇轩，请说。
If you could, before starting Q&A, would you mind that maybe you repeat the Yihua's conclusion last in Chinese into English, that the two speakers can understand?
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I'll just briefly summarize and translate what Yihua basically share her experience while she working with me, because how we work together were more like I will come to her side and show her how to do this and that in terms of collection, preservation, conservation. It was not like, okay, just give it to me and I will just done everything for her. And she expressed that for her it's a very touching experience. Like I am showing her a real conservation aspects in front of her in life. And that was something that she never experienced while she was mostly trained as an artist. Okay. Great. 好，那回到那个 Q&A 的环节，我们大概就是会有一点点时间可以接受一个两个，有没有？或是要回应的？那我这边就是问宜华一个问题好了。就是也算是我自己个人的大哉问，就是你觉得在这段期间，带给关美馆的这些东西，它是否是让你有办法交给下一位其他的馆员，或者是说下一个馆员，是不是有办法永续的 ？So I was asking Yihua that based on our collaboration experience, does she feels like what we teach her is able to be sustained to the next who will be responsible for the same work that she's doing right now?
好，我觉得就像我刚刚说的，这是一个很注重伦理、很注重职业伦理的一件事情，因为你要做的是。以我是创作背景来说，你不只是要把你的作品做好而已，你要做的事情是你要去保存其他人做的东西，然后你还要去理解他做这个东西是为什么，所以就是你要去守护其他人的作品。然后我觉得这件事就是高度仰赖你自己的，你到底把这件工作当成是一个工作，还是你想要好好的去守护其他人的作品。对，所以我觉得我会尽我所能的把我们现在已经建立好的架构交给下一个人，因为当架构被建立之后，他就是可以比较轻松的去填写完这些内容，然后他可以确实是建立一个比较基本的资料，这样。然后我觉得我就是尽我所能的把这些事情交给下一个人，然后下面的那个人就在看他对这份工作的自我要求是什么。谢谢。
I'll briefly do the translation. So Yihua said that because she was trained as an artist, but as a conservator or preservation professional, it is actually highly relying on your own ethical principle, because you are not just creating things that is responsible for yourself, you're responsible for others' works and for the whole collection of the museum. And for her, she does feel that this is really different from being an artist and being a conservator that care for other people's work. And so she will do her best to make documentation and make sure that what she learned and documented can be passed on to the next person. But it is actually still go back to the person who take this responsibility have this ethic in mind. 我们还有5分钟，还有一个问题。那如果没有的话，我觉得可以提早进入休息，然后提早回来，因为其实我们都有收到接下来2位讲者的简报，实在是非常的长又丰富。对 ，So we will start the break now and go back earlier, 5 minutes earlier. 4点10分的时候大家回来。对，然后因为现在展场有很多的展览可以看看。
我们现在馆内有2个展览，一个是我们的关渡双年展，叫做空商作为画前置的宇宙叙事，在我们的1楼跟3楼、4楼，我们现在位置是3楼，大家进来的地方是4楼。有一个双年展是我们的馆长所策划的，那展出3位艺术家分别是李一凡、陈介仁，还有一位就是2亿美籍的艺术家 Anton Vitoko。那大家可以就是利用可能10分钟、15分钟的时间先欣赏一下展览。那在2楼我们一直听到那个歌声呢，是一位韩国的艺术家叫做白炫珍 Baehong-jin 他的展览。那也主要其实刚好跟今天的主题蛮不谋而合的，是全馆的作品主要呢都是影像的创作。好，那等一下就是欢迎大家可以利用一点点时间参观展览。然后宇谦，我可以工商一下吗？就是我们明天在馆内下午2点钟也会有一个陈介仁老师的艺术家对谈，那他会针对他这几年来的创作的一些转向跟关注和大家做分享。明天下午2点钟到4点钟会在我们美术馆的1楼介仁老师的展场旁边，那也欢迎大家就是我们明天见，谢谢哦。那就进入休息时间。
好，那我们的下半场我们就现在开始。首先我会先介绍一下我们下午的第一位讲者 Mr. Andreas Weiser。那Weiser 他是毕业于德国科隆的应用科技大学的保存跟修复的学程。那他其实很早在2003年开始就一直在实际媒体修复跟影像音像典藏的领域担任一个保存经理的角色。那一直在不管是公共或是私人的收藏的当代艺术啊、光的艺术、实际媒体艺术、类比、数位等等的都有非常非常多的经验。那2015年的时候，他也加入了慕尼黑的多纳研究机构，来负责现代的绘画馆，还有很多其他馆舍的实际媒体艺术的典藏。那在2019年的时候，他与另外一位博士共同创办了保存及服务这样子的一间提供私人服务的公司。那一直都在艺术史和保存维护这两个领域之间来为艺术和文化产业制定整体可以持续的一个保存策略。那他过去也曾经在阿姆斯特丹大学来担任客座的讲师，那也曾经在德国之声学院还有北非和中东的顾问，和担任印度歌德学院的顾问。So thank you. Let's welcome our first speaker for the second part, Andreas Weiser, on preserving time-based media, bridging gaps through collaboration with external specialists.
Yeah, thank you for So, yeah, thank you. Before we start, I wanted to address my deep thanks to the organization team with Yu Xian and Chu Chan for the invitation to this conference. It is great to support and connect to professionals in the field of time-based media conservation. And I'm very thankful for your insights in establishing time-based media conservation at your organization. In my presentation, we will take a look at the typical work of a freelance time-based media conservator and the associated gaps which might be present at a museum or a collection. So what are the typical areas of work that time-based media conservators are hired for? What could be the gaps external professionals could fill? And in respect to this, what are the main tasks associated with the role of a time-based media conservator working freelance for different institutions? It's not uniform. It depends very much on what kind of clients you are working for and how their collection is organized. And of course, how the contract looks like. Sometimes it's a short project with just a few questions to a single artwork, but sometimes it's a multi-year project where a whole collection gets an all-over evaluation and digitization. The role of a time-based media conservator is dynamic and requires a combination of technical expertise, art historical knowledge, and a commitment to preserving the unique qualities of these artworks. Please don't take my list as a complete and comprehensive. It's just my personal short list and wrap up for the main areas of work and possible gaps we need to bridge. It starts with assessment and documentation, then conservation and storage, then preservation planning and digitization or migration, pre-acquisition cost and risk assessment, and condition reporting and exhibition care, and the last point could be public outreach. So the first gap, assessment and documentation. When you start chronological, the assessment or evaluation of an art collection or archive is the first task when you start your work with a collection. And we've seen this in the morning. The goal is to evaluate the condition of time-based media artworks and assess potential risks for deterioration, and to document the technical details of the artworks, including hardware, software, and playback equipment. But this can look very different. In the last years, I was traveling with my equipment to numerous collections in Europe. I am working with different kinds of tape check machines which check the physical state and the playability of tapes. The main task was normally to check what types of tape are in the collection, and more important, how is the condition of these tapes.
Since the content is most important, this information is crucial for all following steps. Damaged tapes or degraded tapes are at high risk for not getting properly digitized. That's why it is so important to get a clear picture on the physical status of the tapes in a collection. After the check of the tapes, the tender for digitization is tailored to the condition of the tapes. Since collections are different and their holdings nowadays are mainly digital, my equipment has changed dramatically. When I'm traveling now, most of my equipment fits into a small rugged container and consists of different computers, cables, and technical equipment. It is still about assessment and evaluation, but the media has changed completely. I use computers with write blockers much more often than tape cleaners or video decks when I check artworks these days. Except for film, analog media is really an exception when acquisitions are made today. Analog media truly seems to be obsolete when it comes to new acquisitions in collections. One could think this would make it easier in handling and storage since digital technologies are everywhere today. And you might think that it is also much easier for collections to deal with digital data and content than with tapes and physical carriers. But from my experience, this is hardly the case. Most collections don't have dedicated staff to check files and data, so this task is often left out and files are ingested without proper testing and quality checks. The second gap could be conservation planning and storage. The goals are to develop conservation strategies and plans to address the unique challenges posed by time-based media, considering both the physical and digital components. A key role here plays the physical storage, but on the same page, it is important to implement preventive conservation measures to minimize deterioration, such as controlling temperature, humidity, and pest control. This all can be achieved when you design and implement proper storage and handling protocols to ensure the physical safety of time-based media artworks, considering the fragility of equipment and media. When I visited archives or museums in the analog days, it was always a question about the correct storage. The main questions are, how is the current situation? How should it look like ideally? And does the storage space need some improvements? From my experience, a lot has improved in the past years, and that's not how it looks like everywhere. But it is still sometimes a challenging process to dive into the far corners of an archive. At the beginning, most of the questions concentrated on climate conditions and packing of the media. My advice is always to spend the money for digitization and the digital storage instead for new housings or air conditioning. But besides that, there might be solutions which are very close to perfect when it comes to storage spaces for media. In 2007, I was supporting a private art collection to build a storage space dedicated for data carriers. And this storage space is climate controlled at 50 centigrade Celsius and 35% relative humidity 24/7. It's a small room with a suspended rolling rack system that contains all data carriers from film to video. But to be honest, that's one of only a few I know so far that are designed like this. When budgets are tight, it might be easier to concentrate on relative humidity, like in this case. So consultancy on physical storage was and still is a key area of work for time-based media conservators. If you don't have the expertise in-house, you should look for external experts to check and evaluate your situation. Same is for digital storage or preservation planning, because nowadays we are talking about virtual storage, and this seems to be even more complicated than designing the perfect physical storage. The bigger the institution, the easier it might be to rely on a working IT environment. But this would mean to understand what IT people talk about and to offer them well-structured data and, more important, the needed metadata to deal with the delivered files. This is not always an easy task. So ideally, time-based media conservators assist in this process and develop a strategy which fits in the local storage architecture. But smaller archives or collections often must focus on local solutions due to budget and staffing constraints. the gathering of basic metadata is even harder for these institutions. So often, these institutions rely on external experts for the setup of local, robust storage systems, which then can be run without internal IT staff by themselves. Okay, and the third gap could be preservation and digitization. In my experience, the lack of affordable, redundant, and safe storage is a dangerous bottleneck for preservation and digitization, and as well for potential new acquisitions. In all cases, a whole bunch of new questions arises. The goals for preservations are to set up a strategy for long-term preservation and to implement this strategy into the workflows of the collection. On a regular basis, you should perform quality controls to address any existing corruption or degradation. And for digitization, the goals are to manage the migration of digital and analog formats to newer, more stable formats to prevent obsolescence and to ensure continued accessibility. Of course, this needs a deep dive into file formats, codecs, wrappers, and digital infrastructure to navigate through all potential risks associated. A comprehensive preservation strategy for time-based media artworks involves a combination of preventive measures, documentations, and active conservation practice. Depending on what kind of media you are dealing with, this can look very different. So an individual strategy tailored to your collection might include very different tasks and topics compared to this example here. In this case, the key components that should be part of the strategy are divided by the physical media and the digital assets. As you can see, a lot of tasks are addressed on both sides. They include obsolescence, ingest, migration, quality control, handling, file formats, storage, and risk assessment, just to name a few. When it comes to the regular checks and the daily work, you might involve software like MediaConch or forensic tools for evaluation. These are often open source and help conservators to judge about the quality of the content and the status of the files. When it comes to digitization, we are still today faced with one core question. How can we make sure that the full richness of authenticity of an audiovisual object won't be changed dramatically during digitization? Especially for archives, it was not an easy task to find a compromise between ethical aspects and the needs of an archive. This might be easier for a museum since ethical aspects have more weight. But I remember endless discussions regarding perfect file formats, containers, workflows, and capture cards. When finally these questions are answered, the even more critical task needs to be addressed: writing a comprehensive tender and define the exact specifications for the digitization process. A detailed tender should include information about the condition of the media, cleaning, handling, minimum requirements for the equipment used, and specifications regarding file formats, naming conventions, quality checks, and staff. This all is needed to find the perfect service provider. One of the problems we are seeing now is that many providers have significantly cut down their services or are out of business. We are facing a dying business, and not only the data carriers get old, also do the machines and the experts. So it could get harder to find companies, labs, and businesses which provide core competencies for the artworks in your custody. The fourth gap you probably need to deal with is the pre-acquisition risk and cost assessment. A lot of institutions learned from previous acquisitions that some artworks are more complicated to maintain and keep them alive than others. This task is normally covered by time-based media conservators with a dedicated set of documents and interviews. Because we learned that there is a strong need for professional assistance through the whole life cycle of an artwork. The long-term preservation starts ideally before the acquisition. A tailored set of documents, including a questionnaire where all relevant questions regarding the artwork are covered, should be the base for its preservation in the future. In my experience, this important step has not yet been implemented in the acquisition processes of many institutions. Subjectively, private collections seem seem to be much more open to this pre-screening than public institutions. I only can speculate, but there seems to be a barrier between the curators and the conservators. The other reason why pre-acquisition checks are not implemented in the workflow is very simple. It is the lack of specialized conservators or other professionals in the collections. But when it comes to complex artworks, it might be very useful to ask at least some questions regarding the technical equipment. This also includes information about the power consumption. Just as an example, CRTs or CRT monitors need a lot of power to fire the cathode ray gun up initially. This could be problematic for the power infrastructure of some institutions when exhibiting artworks like this work from Kutluk Ataman containing 40 used CRT monitors. But also internally, there should be a risk assessment about the costs for keeping this particular equipment alive for the next decades. How much internal expertise do you have to take care for 40 CRT monitors? How many hours do you spend for spare part hunting, testing, calibration, and regular maintenance? And in the end, what is the life expectancy for these monitors? Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? You never know. With the lack of communication and the lack of professional trained people, a lot of tasks remain unaddressed or just not monitored. Sometimes it is even not clear after signing the purchase contract what exactly will be part of the artwork and which components need to be sourced afterwards. Same is for a risk assessment. Some artworks include components which are potentially harmful to people or are very fragile. This must be clarified prior to acquisition to determine if the artwork can be part of a regular exhibition or if precautions are required. Asta Gröting's work, A Spark of Passion, where a spark ignites at regular intervals between two wires mounted in a hole in the wall, is only one example for such an artwork. But even the communication with the seller is sometimes problematic or complicated. Sometimes the important questions are not asked out of caution or concern for the seller. This also counts for the transport or transfer, where a lot of institutions just trust the seller that there will be everything okay. After the delivery, there's sometimes no check for completeness, condition, and functionality, especially at complex artworks or with files. This leads to the conclusion that multidisciplinary art needs a multidisciplinary approach for conservation and long-term preservation to bridge the gaps associated with time-based media collections. It needs a collaborative approach between different professions, different professionals, and specialists. For museums, this means that external experts should be part of their tailored preservation strategy for dedicated artworks. Besides these tasks and questions, a lot of collections are in the need for condition reporting and supervision of exhibitions, which could be the fifth gap in my list. It starts with multi-channel video artworks, but is very often tied to complex installations. I made the experience that single-channel artworks hardly are on the list when I'm asked for support. Most of the questions come for artworks that are complex because of physical items or from the equipment. While the understanding of a single-channel video artwork is easy in most cases, it gets difficult when more technical components are involved. Condition reports can get quite comprehensive when every aspect of an artwork is tested and described in detail. From my experience, some collections did underestimate the complexity of some artworks in the past. But a lot of institutions learned from obsolescence and breakdown of components in the past, how time-consuming it can be to keep these artworks running, and how complex it is to get broken artworks back to life so they are running in the intended way. Luckily, in this case, it was just one transformer that broke. But what if one of the fluorescent tubes breaks? It's a nightmare. Even more expensive and even more complex on the long run are installations which consist of several components and technical devices. In the case of Wang Shui's Weak Pearl, there are computers, audio equipment, LEDs, and a lot of transformers involved. The artwork was made in situ by the artist and needed a full documentation after this installation. I noticed that a lot of collections nowadays are very cautious when it comes to such complex installations. They learn from previous acquisitions how painful it is to preserve these artworks, send them on loan, or reinstall them just 5 years later. While it seems easy to preserve the outer walls of an Kusama infinity room because it is a simple construction made of wood, this is definitely not the case for the glowing bubbles inside of the room. They are fragile and hard to maintain. Their surface is very delicate and susceptible for dents and scratches. Even more attention needs the software, which controls the glowing and color-changing effects of the artwork. It is running on a not specified board located in a so-called black box, not to speak from the LED panels inside the bubbles, which are wired through the stainless steel poles. One gap you might not have on your list could be the public outreach, not only for the collection itself, but also for conservators as professional workers in the field. It is important to explain the complexity and work associated with time-based media artworks. It helps to raise awareness when you engage with the public through exhibitions, talks, and other outreach activities to tell about the conservation challenges associated with time-based media artworks. Teaching young professionals and people who are taking care for collections is an important task to raise awareness that time-based media artworks differ from classical artworks and need dedicated care. They won't survive resting on a shelf for many years unseen. They need constant assistance and care. Even for collections, it's a way to demonstrate how they take care for the artworks they have in their collection. So one of my clients produced 10 short clips where we showed the preservation strategy of the Julia Stoschek Foundation. This not only is interesting for the public, but also for artists. They know that their artworks are in good and professional hands. Because artists and other collectors know time-based media artworks are often very complex. They are sometimes very expensive. Failure rate might be higher than with traditional artworks. It is overall time-consuming to work with these artworks. It takes time to install, to discover, to understand, to check. They need permanent care, and they are hard to maintain and to preserve. So we all can conclude the only approach to close these gaps and to tackle the tasks is collaboration. Since time-based media artworks are so complex, there are mostly technical gaps associated with them. Most of these gaps can only be bridged by experts, and since these experts often are highly specialized, they are hardly part of the internal staff. So a very common option is to build a strong relationship to a network of external specialists. And this collaborative network will, together with you, take care for your time-based media artworks. Thank you.
我们感谢线上 Mr. Andres 带来的很精彩的分享。然后我想还是有5分钟的时间，问一下现场有没有人要提问 No question from the audience or online. If no, I will ask one question to Andres, if that's okay. So you've talked about a lot of exception in terms of understanding what is time-based media preservation, and it can look very different in different scenario. So I wonder, while you have so many experience, how do you usually communicate with your audience to let them understand the uniqueness, and then to communicate with them to understand the reality of what they can achieve and what they cannot achieve? And the second following this question is, who is mostly on the top of decision-making tree in those institutions? Thank you.
Yeah, that are two very good questions. So the first thing is, it depends very much on what kind of audience I'm dealing with. So is it just an interested audience coming to the museum. It's kind of, trying to showcase on one particular artwork what kind of work is associated with this particular artwork. When you remember the example with the Pike Empire State Building with the broken fluorescent tubes, this is a very easy example to show the audience what they see now is a complex mixture of different technologies and of different specialists which need to be involved in this in the caretaking and the preservation of this object, because I'm feeling more as a preservation manager. I'm not here with my screwdriver and changing the transformers, but I know the specialist who then exchange the transformer. So I know an electrician, I know someone who's taking care for the CRTs, and this is very easy to explain to an audience when you are standing directly in front of this artwork. When it comes to a collection, then it's mostly starting to look at the most recent acquisition they made. Just to give an example, so normally when you look at an acquisition, most of the museums just get USB drive or a download link and that's it, and then they show it in an exhibition and that's it. And 5 years later they hardly know how was it delivered and what kind of information did we receive from the artist for the first exhibition and so on. So just to go to this the most recent acquisition, and then just asking questions from my side to my audience from the museum or the collection. So this is the different way to demonstrate how questions are associated with the with time-based media conservators. And the second question, just help me, what?
Maybe we leave it to the last Q&A session, and I will do a brief translation to the audience. 所以我刚刚是询问 Andres 说，就是他通常是怎么跟他的观众以及顾客在沟通，让他们知道说到底他们希望达成的事情或是遇到的问题是可以达成或不能达成的。那他举的第一个例子是，如果是像是刚刚他有提到白南准的作品，他很明显的只是一个电视坏掉，而且他是带着他的观众在他的客户在这个作品的旁边，然后很明确的告诉他说你现在这个坏掉的东西是因为什么原因，然后也透过询问他们问题，然后他本身其实是作为一个经理人的角色，而不是实际那个带着相关的譬如说打开电脑的CRT 的设备等等的人，但是他知道要去哪边找到相关的专业来协助馆方来维修这些作品。那第二个是他提到，如果是譬如说是一整批藏品的状况，他就会带着他的客户来看他们在最近才购藏的近年才购藏的几件作品，譬如说可能只是3年前5年前的，然后那个时候他们是以譬如说 USB 等等的储存媒体的方式来到馆内，然后询问他们说你们知道这个作品当时是怎么进来的吗？询问他们说知不知道什么问题，那他们在这个问答的过程当中，当下就会知道说其实他们漏掉了非常多重要的资讯。Okay, thank you, Andres. 那我们接下来就邀请下一位讲者 Mr. Alexandra。那他本身是主要是在法国的巴黎工作，那也是一位媒体艺术修复师。那他主要是从法国的文化资产的国家学院毕业以后，就到了荷兰阿姆斯特丹的利马来进行短暂的实习跟停留。那主要也是从事CD-ROM 的这样子的过时媒体艺术的研究来做开始。那2013年以来，他就一直在专注这些因为技术而受到技术代换威胁的一些影像以及音像的艺术作品。那目前他本身也作为一位全职的研究人员，在圣艾蒂安大学攻读关于媒体艺术品保存档案化的一些博士学位。那也曾经在庞毕度艺术中心工作过来，负责录像藏品的数位化。那也针对克里斯马可的这位艺术家的作品 Zapping Zone 的保存研究。好，那 Let's welcome our next speaker, Alexandra Michon。是他的画面。Okay, over to you, Alexandra. Are you muted?
Yes.
We
Do
can
you
hear
see
now.
the
Yeah, we
screen
see
presentation
your
right?
slide. Maybe you can make it full screen.
Is it not full screen right now?
Not full screen now.
Ah, okay, it is on my side.
You have to share another screen. Yeah.
I'll try again to share that way. And now?
Yes, we have it.
Do you see it full screen?
Yeah,
Okay,
we see full screen. Thank you.
perfect.
Over to you.
Thank you. So first of all, many thanks for this invitation, Yusin and Sichuan. I'm very happy to be part of this seminar. And in this presentation, I will try to give a quick overview of the situation in France in the field of media art conservation, focusing primarily on public collections. We will see how the situation is evolving in this field here, as well as what are the changes that we can hope to witness in the years to come, in my opinion at least. Despite the fact that I will mention the institutional field, I am not a full-time internal conservator working in a public museum, since such a position does not exist yet in France for media art conservation. I am initially a freelance conservator trained as a photograph conservator at the National Heritage Institute and a researcher at the University of Saint-Étienne, where I am preparing a PhD on documentation and conservation of technological artworks. I have worked since 2014 periodically on projects for various public institutions, including specific case studies on media art installations for the main national collections, such as Centre Pompidou, for instance, or Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, but also broader conservation plans for entire collections of video art in local museums, where the primary need is still to manage digitization and collection management. Also, just to precise this, I will not mention the field of archives and libraries here, since their approach and management procedures are slightly different from the museums. But it is worth noting that many things are going on about electronic media conservation at the National Library of France already for a long time, like since the mid-90s. Overall, I will try to give the perspective on the French field that grants the fact to be involved with several museums as a freelance conservator at the same time then doing research on conservation in the university field. So the French public collections of media art are mostly comprised of the Centre Pompidou, so it's the Musée National d'Art Moderne, NAM collection, the Centre National des Arts Plastiques, CNAP, and the city contemporary art museums, such as the one from Paris, for instance, Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, but also other important ones like CAPC in Bordeaux, the MAMX in Strasbourg, and also regional ones like the FRAC. The FRAC are the regional contemporary art collections, so smaller scale, but very often with a video collection as well. And some departmental institutions such as Espace Multimédia Gantner, which is the only collection in France fully dedicated to media art. Of course, the Centre Pompidou being one of the earliest media art collection internationally and one of the largest, with its 3,000 artworks, it exceeds by far the number of artworks from all the other museums on the territory for media art. And it has many specificities, such as the presence of very old formats and careers due to the start of the collection in the 70s, like in 76. Most of the other media art collections in France started more around the mid-80s or late 80s and are comprised of a majority of artworks from the 90s or the early 2000s. The FRAC collections generally include approximately between 50 and 100 videos, sometimes slightly more than 100 video artworks. But since there are 23 FRAC across the territory, the totality of the FRAC network actually represents more than 1,000, like almost 2,000 media artworks. So the main initial observation when looking at the conservation status of all these media art collections is certainly its great disparity. It is a multiple speed situation where many of the museums are still on the process of installing basic collection management procedures adapted for time-based media artworks, or some are barely starting the digitization process of their collection of videotapes, while other larger museums are already painstakingly fine-tuning their procedures and have an already well-established system of documentation and equipment monitoring. Except for Centre Pompidou, where the digitization of the video collection started already 15 years ago, most of the museums have started this process very recently or are starting it now in recent years. And this step frequently serves as a first step to begin reflecting on the sustainability and preservation of their entire media art collection. In most of the regional institutions, like the FRAC, there is no curator specially in charge of video and media artworks, and the staff is unprepared to deal with technological artworks, even if some assistant curators and collection managers are starting to train in order to gain better knowledge on these topics. So this results in a great disparity between the existing preservation procedures in larger museums like the Centre Pompidou, where the curators and collection managers at the new media department are highly qualified and already have a lot of procedures for many years, and the procedures in smaller museums for smaller collections where there is frequently no specialized curator dedicated to the media art section. However, one element is consistent. Budgets that are officially labeled as conservation, such as the budgets for conservation paintings or sculpture, for instance, generally do not exist for media art collections in France. For video art collections, the budgets are most of the time only regarded as digitization costs, as they would be for a library, for instance, or an archive. And as a consequence, in-depth case studies of media artworks are still very scarce, since they require rather important budgets for studying and conserving a single artwork, which is not easily granted in comparison with other more traditional types of collections. So traditionally in France, conservators or conservation departments did not exist for the field of video and media art, largely due to the fact that all the tasks belonging to preventive conservation, such as condition assessment, documentation, equipment management, were tasks taken care of by collection managers and assistant curators. And the curative conservation, so the restoration, conservation, so to speak, tasks such as equipment maintenance and repair, as well as digitization actually, were handled by engineers, specialized technicians in production labs, externally and only occasionally. Since there is no degree for media art conservation in the conservation schools yet here, since in-depth conservation case studies on media artworks were quite scarce until recently, the need for a conservator figure who would play a role of expertise, but also coordinator and interface between museum professionals and engineers and technicians is a need that did not become obvious until quite recently, I would say in the past 10 years. So there are no museums in France with in-house conservators specialized in time-based media yet, but conservation tasks in the broad sense for these collections are handled most of the time internally with the help of freelance specialists on certain occasions, mostly when it involves technical tasks or engineering, whether it is in the analog or the digital technologies field. In recent years, many ongoing changes have made this situation evolve, and I think it makes the French field an interesting example of how the things can evolve progressively. Part of it is a direct consequence of technological obsolescence in the industry. With obsolescence progressing, the amount of technicians that were qualified on obsolete technologies decreased extremely inside the production teams and the production labs. Since their primary mission has become the production on current digital media, these technicians have stopped being involved in obsolete equipment maintenance or even digitization, which threatens the access to a precious technical expertise for collection managers and curators. Another part is due to the increasing need of case-specific conservation actions for complex media artworks in order to be able to keep on exhibiting them, with time passing and obsolescence of equipment becoming more and more a direct threat. This might sound obvious, but in a context in which even the broadest scale conservation procedures such as digitization of the videotapes or sustainable archival on servers are still ongoing and far from being achieved in certain museums because of shortages of staff and shortages of budget, the priority was not given to the case-by-case conservation actions. Most of the time, the main required tasks in order to get the artwork functioning in the exhibition room were done by technicians from the production team without the time for research on sustainability or in-depth documentation to anticipate future actions. This is also what I think is starting to change here in recent years. To illustrate these changes, I will take a few moments to show several examples of conservation projects in various museums that have been going on in the past years. And to start with the specific case studies, in 2019, the Centre Pompidou initiated a one-year-long research project for the conservation of one of the major artworks in the history of the media art collection. This piece is a multimedia installation titled Zapping Zone by the filmmaker, photographer, writer, and computer artist Chris Marker. It was produced by the Centre Pompidou in 1990 for the first exhibition entirely dedicated to video, computer images, and photography, Passage de l'Image. The installation is comprised of 19 CRT monitors, including video monitors as well as computer monitors, 6 Apple IIgs computers, 20 photographic prints, and 4 light boxes with 35mm color slides in them. It was frequently modified between 1990 and 1994 in terms of content as much as spatial arrangement, and this blurred what was its reference condition, or even if a reference condition existed at all. In addition, its equipment as well as its carriers, so the many CRT monitors, first of all, and also the Apple II computers and their floppy disks, had become increasingly obsolete and failing, even if the work had been exhibited many times until the years 2010 and even until 2015. Thanks to Marcella Lista, the chief curator of the new media department of the museum, funding was found to undertake this one-year conservation study involving 2 external researchers, Agnès de Cailleux, who is a digital artist and had previously worked on the conservation of computer artworks, and myself, a conservator. It involved a partnership with the Center for Research and Conservation of the Museums of France, the C2RMF, thanks to Cécile Dazor, who is perhaps the first curator who started to tackle the issue of researching technological obsolescence in contemporary art conservation in France in the early 2000s. Actually, most of what I'm going to talk of today would not have occurred without the work that she did at the lab from 2006 onwards. The possible depth that granted such an unusual duration for a conservation study was, to my knowledge at least, a novelty for the French media art field. And to quickly summarize the main tasks that were undertaken, so we did research into all the existing archive of documents about the production of the work at the time in 1990, and about each of the exhibitions of the work, each of its iterations. Discussions and interviews were conducted with many of the people involved in the production at the time or close to Chris Marker. Many exchanges took place with specialists of Apple II computers, the communities of people who are still working today on maintaining this equipment, engineers and technicians. Extensive documentation was made for all the images displayed on their original technologies, but also X-ray and photo documentation were undertaken at the C2RMF lab for an Apple IIgs unit. And mostly, the installation was reconstructed and exhibited a year later, thanks to the help of the museum team, and the maintenance and repair of all the equipment was done by 2 specialized engineers. The choice was made for the exhibition to focus on the 1990 first iteration of the work, as it was seen in the exhibition originally. So, of course, such a conservation study is an exception in terms of time and means, and obviously not any artwork from the media art collections in French museums can benefit from such a treatment. But that doesn't mean that the generalization of such a case-specific approach is impossible to a certain extent. This case study actually was, in many ways, the follow-up of other case studies that we conducted in the previous years with other institutions, including the FRAC Franche-Comté, for instance, with a case study on the installation Becoming Visible by Marina Abramovich from 1993, initiated by Cécile Dazor at the time, or at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris that I mentioned earlier, so the Parisian Modern Art Museum, where we worked on the conservation of a large Namjoon Paik video sculpture from 89, Olympe de Gouges. Both of these studies were strongly focusing on CET monitors and were conducted together with the engineer Pierre-Alain Fardel, who also worked on the zapping zone equipment. You see him here adjusting the last failing monitor on the piece before its exhibition in 2018. But case studies are far from being the main way that media art conservation progresses currently in the French field. For local museums, such as the city ones outside from Paris and the regional ones like the FRAC, most of the needs are focused on setting up procedures for collection management, acquisition, digitization, and storage. In museums such as the CAPC in Bordeaux or the Manx in Strasbourg, for instance, usually a single curator or assistant curator is in charge of several types of collections, including media artworks amongst many others. So this person cannot dedicate entirely their time to managing and conserving the media art collection. Most of the time, the situation is as follows when these museums start working with a freelance media art conservator. The artworks in the collection that originally existed on magnetic tapes are not yet digitized following high-quality conservation standards, but were only transferred to DVD in the early 2000s. This is the very common situation. So everything that exists as digital file is compressed in MPEG-2 format. And these artworks very often are still displayed on DVDs when they have to be exhibited today because better files are lacking. The production of exhibition files has been handled usually so far by local technicians who mostly deal with practical tasks on display equipment. And this sometimes leads to satisfying exhibition copies, but no high quality master files. The acquisition process is usually still quite light and does not come yet with specific requests to the artists or to the seller in terms of which types of master files to provide, which documentation to provide, which information, which instructions when an artwork is acquired. And the management of the media art collection on a daily basis is still very often unpractical and very much based on the emergencies depending on the day-to-day needs for each exhibition. As a consequence, these broad conservation plans usually involve the following steps in accompanying the museum's team and staff for standardized procedures. So this is very common, but just to name the steps quickly, we first assess the condition of the entire collection, both physically, so the condition assessment of the tapes and other carriers, and in terms of content, with the main goal to clarify which artworks are actually missing a proper master file or a proper exhibition copy, or which documentation and which equipment is missing. Then, together with the curators, we write to each artist or gallery for every artwork that misses a master conservation file, to ask if they can provide a digital high-quality master file that they would have already previously conserved themselves. This ensures that no magnetic tape from the collection is going to be digitized without reason afterwards during the digitization step, which would result in waste of money, and the budgets are already not so high, but also in higher risks to get a lower quality file if the tapes stored by the museums have degraded along the years, for instance. Sometimes artists or galleries answer by asking for costs, like the payment of the production costs, in order to provide the file. But in most of the situations, in my experience, it is worth it in order to get a high quality master file for each artwork. We then launched the digitization plan for the remaining artworks for which no master file was found at all, and for which only the magnetic tape exists as a single source. These steps usually consist of collaborating with a digitization lab and supervising the whole process, so writing the instructions, controlling the quality, etc. Once all the artworks have both their digital conservation master files and an exhibition file, we discuss with the curators and computer technicians working in the museum staff, if there are, what is the best storage system and folder structure fitting their uses and needs. Very often, this involves discussing if the scale of their collection justifies dividing the whole digital storage into two split parts, one for the exhibition files and one for the conservation master files. Or if it makes more sense for them to keep all the files related to an artwork inside a single folder, together with its documentation and instruction, contracts, etc. This depends on the scale of the collection most of the time. Then we usually guide the task of filling the database for collection management as well, in order to mention the proper metadata and file specifications in the right fields in the museum database system. In France, most public collections of contemporary art actually use the same system. It's called GECOL, developed by Video Museum, and this facilitates a lot the standardization of documenting media artworks, even if, of course, GECOL is far from being an ideal system for this type of artworks, but there are always workarounds. And finally, next to these steps, we also discuss every time the ways of improving the acquisition process. This involves mostly improving the forms to fill for the artists or the sellers, like the galleries, the type of technical information to request when an artwork is acquired, and mostly defining the type of files and equipment that the artists have to provide. In the end, both specific case studies and broader conservation plans are a key to how media art conservation is progressing in French collections. Case studies can be difficult to set up time-wise and budget-wise, but they don't only benefit the artwork that is being studied, they also benefit the entire field by improving research methods. For instance, many elements that were researched during the zapping zone study were benefiting from previous actions led in other institutions, and later on have benefited the conservation process of other artworks in the collection of Centre Pompidou as well, such as the CD-ROM artwork by Chris Marker produced later in 1997, titled In Memory, which has been, since then, migrated for the web in HTML5. But to adapt to the disparity of museum needs, setting up and accompanying conservation plans focused on entire collections is also very important, and mostly training the people in charge of these collections in order for them to have a strong enough comprehension of their artworks and their technicality. Only then the ground can be set for future case studies zooming in on specific artworks, and the needs for each specific work can be identified and clarified, sparing the risk to figure it out too late once an artwork already has been planned for exhibition. And I can stop here. I think it can be a good conclusion, and it's already 20 minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra, for your wonderful presentation. We will also go for a quick Q&A for you. 现场有人有想要向 Alex 询问问题的吗？没有的话，那个我刚刚有放一个暗装资圈。
Okay, thank you for the great presentation, Alex. From your case study, I have a small question that I assume that the plan is that you want the goal is that keep the CRT monitor or Apple II computer that alive until they can. So it's like in the case study planning, how long actually are you plan that you can maintain those monitors live, so to say?
Well, that's a bit the impossible question to answer, but what I can say is what we have observed so far while exhibiting the work, because it was exhibited for quite long, and what was discussed with the engineers who worked on the restoration of the equipment. But in the end, the main answer is still exactly like Andreas said earlier, that actually you never know. Even when you have really an engineer's expertise on the equipment, you will always come to the conclusion that it is impossible to predict exactly the amount of time and the amount of years that they are going to hold before they start failing. And we've been observing this very concretely on the Apple IIgs CRT monitors, for instance, because even after they had been entirely restored, so all the capacitors had been changed, it was really a long, that's the images that you saw in the start of the presentation, it was really a long process, and even then, the work was exhibited for a year and a half, I think, maybe almost 2 years. So it was quite a long period of exhibition. And during this period, several of these monitors actually failed, even though they had been entirely renewed. And they required, again, maintenance, again, action from the engineer for like regular base maintenance. So I think the equipment that we kept for the video monitors and the Apple IIgs can still be used, and this is what the exhibition has proved, for some period of time of exhibition, like what we did now, like the work was exhibited more than a year and a half and it held, but it is with this very, very important condition that people have to be watching it and maintaining it on a regular basis while it's being exhibited. So it requires action on a regular basis in the exhibition room. And it is impossible to say for sure if it's gonna be able to go on for a long period of time, like a decade or 2 decades, being exhibited this way. Of course, it's the goal, because the main, the core of the study was to manage, while it is still possible, exhibiting this work fully on its original equipment for the displays, not for the players, because the players are like entirely another story, but for the displays. But of course, it was also discussed during the study how the museum would do if someday the piece cannot be exhibited with CRT monitors anymore. So this is a negative part. And just to add a bit more optimistic side to it, what I also see in the recent years is that the very pessimistic view that we had on the survival of CRT screens for a long time, and that you heard in many discussions, many talks with conservators, is also slightly starting to change, because it can be more than before, I think now, possible to find the right people to go on working on this. For instance, with the example of Pierre-Alain Fardel, the engineer that I mentioned, I was a bit proven wrong on the fact that these engineers were disappearing in France, because this guy is quite young and he's not at all like an older generation technician, and he's trained for this, and he does a lot of CRT conservation. So maybe it also shows that there are young engineers who are working on this. And the recent example of the Kolovac lab in Germany also proves that there are people interested in, of course, it's at a small scale, like a human scale, and not at an industrial scale, but there are people interested in remaking CRT screens. So it's all a matter of scale, but it can be that these artworks can survive with CRT screens for longer than we would have said. But it's impossible to say if it's going to be for 10, for 20 years. But for some years, I would say yes.
Thank you.
I'll briefly summarize their question and answer。那刚刚子权应该是简单来讲就是询问关于 CRT 电视怎么延长它的寿命这个部分，对吗？
我比较好奇是说，因为他 case study 讲到说，他们其实基本上有一个外部的工程师重新的去维修他们的电视这些电视机，然后我好奇的是说，其实他们的目标是要一直维持用 CRT 电视展示，然后它可以维持这样的状态可以维持多久，或者是说这样子一直维修的状态可以维持多久？对，
好，那很简短的一个总结是，刚刚其实他讲了非常多。那其实一开始是一直在强调说，所有的包含 CRT 电视之外的所有的这样子的电子设备，我们是不可能完全的去预测它到底实际上可以使用多久。那就在他刚刚前面有提到的一些案例，有一些展览甚至有2年之久。那在那些展览之中，就是会有一些少部分的电视当然就会坏掉，然后有一些可能神奇的就可以用蛮久的这样子。那其实有一个重点是说，当这些CRT 电视正在被展出的过程当中，你是需要有相关的专业的人员去不断的在这个展览的过程当中维护它，然后让它保持了一个很良好的正常的一个使用的状况。那在这个状态之下，我们或许可以比较乐观的去认为它可以使用的稍微久一点，但是依然没有办法明确的去评估它到底几年之后会发生什么事情。那至于说没有 CRT 了以后怎么办，那其实他刚应该是没有直接回答说 CRT 没有了以后其他的一些替代方案，但是当然有提到说会有和策展人这边讨论过这些问题，但是他有观察到在他所知道的这个领域，其实已经开始有一些相对年轻但是也对了解这些技术有兴趣的年轻人开始想要去学习，然后也有耳闻有一小撮人或许会想要开始重新来制作 CRT 这样子的一种想法出现，所以他们部分的保存人物师当然是抱持着一个比较乐观的态度来看待这些情报。OK， 好，thank you, Alexandra. So we will now move on to our last session, which is the panel discussion and the Q&A, and it will only last until 6 o'clock here because it's already a closing time at the museum, so we won't postpone after 6 o'clock. 那我就先问现场有没有观众，再问一次现场的观众想要提问。红旗有什么想法吗？没有，非常有共鸣，如此而已。We have one question from 怡化。可以中文吗？
好，我的问题是，因为我对实际媒体修护师这个职业并没有这么，就是就我现在的认识，对他们的认识，我觉得他们就是一个很像顾问或是一个中介的角色，他可以提供你一些建议，或是指引你说，你这个可能哪里坏掉，你要怎么做，或是你可以去找一些工程师来修这样。然后我想问的就是，就是在未来实际媒体修护师他这个工作，就是他们对数位作品，就是数位时代之后的作品，他们是有没有在关注这个部分？然后还有在数位时代之后，数位作品的保存，它会变得更没有障碍吗？这样就是相较于从类比转数位的这件事情。然后我有个小分享，是我刚看到那么多 CRT 电视的时候，我都觉得很可怕，就是我就好怕它坏掉。我现在如果有这么多 CRT 电视，我一定超苦恼，我就会很不想要动它。
Okay, I'll do the translation. First, she just expressed that when she saw so many CRT monitors, her first feeling is so frightened and really afraid that they will break as an exhibition officer. Yeah, that's her nightmare. And her question is, now we're getting into from analog and into a digital era. Do you feel like the conservation work as a type media conservator transfer into the digital era for digital art where will be more less barrier, or let's say more you will have more choices in when the work becoming digital in terms of preservation strategy. That's her question. Do you feel like that? Maybe Andres?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think people think it's getting easier when it's digital and when it's this transferred from analog to digital. And the thing is, I think people have more respect for physical artworks and physical items. And for example, if you have a video cassette or a CRT monitor, people have more respect because they know, oh, this is a complex technical device. But when they get a file, they think it's not different from what I'm handling on my personal laptop. So I can do it. I don't need an expert. So yes, the barrier is much more smaller or lower than with old analog equipment. But the question is this better for the artworks? I don't think so, because so the same is with the discussion, what does a digital storage cost? What do you need as a budget? People go to the next electronic store and see that a hard drive costs $100, and they think, well, digital storage is very cheap. I just need one hard drive from the next store and then I'm safe. And that's not a solution, but because people have this very personal experience with digital elements or files or videos or photographs or whatever, they tend to think it's easier when it comes to a digital long-term preservation. But to make it in a correct way, I think it's more complex than in the analog days. And it has a lot of more wrong directions you can choose on your way or on your path to long-term preservation. But maybe Alex has some additional thoughts about
agree.
it.
You said already everything. I can maybe just add a concrete example that demonstrates exactly this and what we observe often in small museums in France about this. I think one of the big difficulties is setting up standards, and in the analog era, one of the big advantages is that it was much easier to have a standard that even smaller collections with no dedicated professional for this could follow. For instance, the DigiBeta standard for acquisition is absolutely everywhere here in all collections, even very small collections, because people knew that it was the way video was acquired in big museums like Centre Pompidou, and even in smaller museums, they followed the standards and acquired tapes on digital Betacam. So this exact situation is what is impossible today. Like, it was quite easy to follow. There was one way, and it was done this way for very long, even at a point that quite late, when the DigiBeta was already obsolete, like around 2010, between 2005 and 2010, there were still museums here acquiring works that were produced as a digital file, sometimes in HD, and a downgrade version in digital beta, because they still thought it was the best standard to follow. So indeed, I think this increasing of the complexity of ramification and branches you can take with the many options that exist with the digital has made things much more difficult for people who are not already experts to know what is the right way to take, and it's much more difficult to set the standards. The only thing I think on which it's a progress is the tools. Like, for sure, open source, free and accessible tools are getting more and more, and this is something that definitely increases in comparison with the past. But for the rest, it's an increasing difficulty and not an ease. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you. I'll do the translation. 那好，刚刚怡华问的问题是中文的。那我先刚刚 Andres 的意思是说，去解释类比跟实体的，其实跟数位的，大家大部分认为实体的作品比较容易得到关注以及尊重，就是至于保存这件事情，因为它很明确的你是摸得到的。但是来到了数位以后，它反而民众会比较有一种，或者是说收藏机构会比较有一种他跟自己个人的一些在家里使用数位档案的这个经验，因为有所重叠的状况，所以反而会认为说这很简单啊，我自己就可以完成了。那就跟我去旁边的灿坤什么之类的买一个硬碟回来，然后我放在里面，这样就叫做有在保存了。那其实它确实是在那个障碍，也就是怎么做这件事情的障碍确实是降低，可是它增加的选择实际上当中是暗藏着非常多错误的选择的，就是至于作品的保存这件事情。那接着Alex 那边就补充说，特别是在类比的这些影像的部分，他可以看到的是，即使这些非常小的一些机构，他们也都已经知道，其实长久以来所谓的类比转数位，或者说磁带的怎么存放，就是用这样子的保存方法，然后也一直留存很久了。那即使是近几年才开始做这件事情的馆所，也都知道到底要用什么样子的标准来做这件事情。那原则上都会很明确清楚的跟随着一个保存维护的一个方针。那比较有趣，他甚至提到说有一些馆所会将他们其实来的时候是数位的档案，再把它降存成磁带的状态，因为他们的认知是那个才是一个真正的属于保存影音影像的一种格式这样子。那所以它反而是变成更为复杂的。那唯一对 Alex 来说一个比较好处的地方，可能是在工具的这个面向。那因为其实进到数位以后，就有越来越多开源，所谓开源的工具，它其实就是免费的，然后大家也都可以自由来使用的这样子的工具的选择。至于类比的磁带，它可能必须要用一个非常专业，只有少数的实验室能够去构取的这样子的一个状态来讲，是比较属于优点的部分。OK，
我想补充，我要真中还是英文？So I would like to add something on. I think from the positive aspect, that actually from some practical practice from the archive, they already have some standards, or maybe to say, I think more and more now we are more clear about the, so to say, master file or conservation files. What's the best format for that? So I think it might take some time that all of us can figure out, and museum can figure out what's and also artist side can produce the better or let us obtain the master file or conservation file, I think.
Translation, please.
OK， 所以我的意思是说，其实现在有很多档案局或是影音的档案，因为他们也会有一些影音档案相关的保存，所以在那个部分其实他们有蛮明确的一些标准在，就是他们要保存什么样的格式。那其实这个部分已经慢慢的被带进博物馆内，所以那怎么说？所以我觉得可能再等待一点时间，让美术馆还有 conservator 就是实际媒体保存修复师跟艺术家们可能意识到这件事情的时候，慢慢的我们其实就会比较容易收到相对应我们需要的档案来做保存这样子。然后 Andres 有想要补充。
Over to you, Andres.
Yeah, you mentioned artists. So my question is, how's the current situation in Taiwan? Do you have experience how artists react when you are approaching them as a conservator and then asking these questions about file formats? How was it produced and archival formats? high resolution files, not only H.264 files and so on. How is their reaction? Are they sensitive to these topics, or is it completely new to them and they just are frustrated because it's so complicated when a conservator starts to ask questions and who wants to have a whole set of files, not just one file, and ask questions about the manuals and so on? How's your experience? Would be interesting. Thank you.
我先翻译问题。对，那 Andres 就是跟着子权刚好提到了，艺术家或许也会越来越受到相关资讯的影响，而给予博物馆或是美术馆更好的档案品质。对，那所以他就好奇说，在台湾我们就是作为一位保存维护师，在有没有一些跟艺术家沟通的经验，他们对于档案的提供，或者是说高于展览版本的档案的提供这件事情是有意识的吗？或者是说相关的经验到底是什么样？子权，你要先回答吗？
Yeah. So I think from some senior artists, video artists, they already kind of know that they have to provide some high quality files to the museums. And so when we was working in the museum in Taiwan, when we look into that the deliver from the artist, sometimes we can get like uncompressed video files, etc. And I think some kind of like, for example, when I studied media art in Taiwan, our professors also actually taught us how should we prepare for our work to when the work into the collection, how many things we should prepare, like manual installation instructions, or what kind of files. But one point, I think nowadays, just like Alex said, that earlier we think also like we have to save the file we transfer the video file into the tapes. So I think nowadays we have to think about more like it's actually we now to preserve the file instead of the video tapes. I mean in this time in the digital period. Yeah. 所以你要翻版记得。
OK， 那子权刚刚大概是在说，根据我们以前在国美馆工作的经验，其实相对资深的艺术家，当然在台湾，其实你的作品能够进到一个美术馆的典藏里面，实际上都已经算是比较有一些被认可，然后资深的艺术家，其实他们大部分都有一个认知，会给到所谓的 uncompressed， 就是没有被压缩的这样的档案格式。那包含说子权他提到他自己以前研究所时候，作为一位媒体艺术家，在被养成的时候，学校的老师其实也有教他们说，到底要准备什么样子的档案，以及相关的文件，或者说装置说明书等等的给美术馆这个地方。那最后是提到说但是至于刚刚 Alex 提到的有一些数位档案会被降存成磁带这件事情，在台湾则是大部分是更专注在数位档案的保存这一块。
应该是说就是这部分在以前我们可能认知到说要提供母带就是这件事情嘛，所以我们的认知就是说我们要把档案转回到磁带的方式去保存，然后连同档案一起给美术馆来做保存。可是其实这样的方式就像刚刚 Alex 有讲到，它就是现在已经到 2K 也好 4K 也好的那个画质了，可是你再把它转回去，现在已经没有相对应的磁带可以储存这种画质的档案了。所以相对来讲它就是降存了这个画质，你已经降低了这个画质，所以或许现在来讲应该是 focus 在这些档案的保存，而不是就又回去把它转成磁带来做保存这样。对。
OK. I also have one case study. Sorry, Alex. Yeah, please.
Just a small reaction just before switching to another question. Since we were discussing the topic, there is also something I'm curious to hear from you, because exactly on this matter, I have the impression, and I don't know if it's specific to here or if it's a general thing, that The main difference with artists is between artists who work only within, like, technically speaking, the video field and are really specifically working with the video and digital files, and which is the case for many installations. Artists who are more like plasticians, like generalist artists in terms of media, and amongst other works, they actually have some digital art and media art. And even when these artists, this is what I have learned a bit in the recent years, that I see how much I have to be specifically careful with these cases, because even when there are very famous artists and very big, if they are not specifically video artists, it can completely happen that they actually don't know what to provide, and they are going to provide only compressed H.264 files, even when they have a fully dedicated artist studio, and you would expect that they exactly know the standards and that they are going to provide the right thing. And I don't know if it's a general thing or if it's just bad luck, but it looks like this a bit on my side for now.
那 Alex 也分享了他自己经验中一个蛮有趣的观察，就是我们刚刚一直提到的这些所谓的知道要提供相对较高品质的艺术家，似乎都是非常专注在录像这个媒材，就是他本身就是只做录像这样子的艺术家。但是如果是一位譬如说录像包含装置，然后甚至更多其他的各类型的多媒体的媒材也综合在一起，这样子的艺术家，即使他已经非常知名了，然后甚至有自己的很完整的工作室，通常他就不太知道自己到底要提供什么样子的东西，那也不太能够这就是他发现到的一个观察，然后也好奇说是不是这是一个只有他自己的观察，或者说其他人也有这样子的一个理解。对，
我想知道我们在台湾是不是也是这样的状况啊？
你要回应吗？
还是你可以回应？你有想法吗？
我觉得实际的案例好像
我觉得应该是说这样讲好了，我先用中文好了。这样是说，就是因为现在当代艺术越来越多会开始使用录像啊这些数位的媒材，然后所以有些它本来就不是从新媒体或者录像这样的体系出身，那他在对这些的数位媒体不熟悉的情况下，他就不会意识到他要提供这样的档案这样。对啊。
So Ziquan was responding, adding that possibly because they are not only focused on the video part, so they don't really hold a very in-depth expertise about the video file, this format, this technology itself. So then occurs that they don't really understand the medium that they are using. Yeah, and I can also, I don't really have a full like a case study about a specific work, but I can share my experience when I was in M+. My first tag was kind of like reviewing a whole tons of artist questionnaire that previously sent by their assistant curator to all the artists, and it's very clear that some of the artist questionnaire from the same artwork, from the same series, are answered by different people from the studio. So the answer were not directly coming from the artist himself or any technician that work with the artist, but just maybe I could imagine they received an email and then send it to some assistant and had different assistant answering it and then send it back to the museum without any like checking. Yeah. So
the very problematic thing that we see often here is galleries answer instead of artist studio or artist, and these are the forms that are very often really lacking information.
Yeah.
True.
OK， 我刚刚大概是分享了之前就是至于为什么有些时候艺术家相对没有办法提供一个比较完整的资讯或是作品的档案这件事情，我就分享了之前我在香港工作的时候，其实可以很明确的看到有时候他们回答出来的那个 提问表，明明就是同一位艺术家，然后同一个系列的录像艺术作品，但是可能有3件，但是这3件呢都是明显是由不同人填写，然后理应要是一模一样的资讯却完全的不同。那可以猜测到的是，当艺术家收到的这些问题单的信件的时候，他可能就是很一般的丢给他的助理说，美术馆问这个问题，你帮我填一填寄回去给他们。那他自己可能也没有去做review 的动作。那刚刚 Alex 也是补充到说，那通常他们也会遇到一个经验是，这些表格是由艺廊来做填写的，根本就没有回到创作者艺术家这个地方来做填写，导致说有诸多的资讯是不正确或是遗漏的。Okay, let's move on to the next question. 子权，你要不要问你的问题？
好。Yeah, I have another question about CRT monitors. It's actually we have kind of almost dying or small industry early days that very popular to repair CRT monitors. And what we are thinking perhaps in the future we can cooperate with them. And what would you recommend to how you bring them into this field to cooperate, Alex?
Do you mean like part of the industry that is still functioning, like factories?
No, not the factory, but it's like a small repair, like a restore engineering. They have a small, they have a small shop. Then they can repair the CRT monitors.
I see.
Yeah,
I think it's what Andreas was saying about the coordination and supervision. I see the same situation happening also here very often. In the end, the important thing is that there is someone else who plays the interface. So in that case, it would be a conservator like you, who is not like the repair person with the engineer expertise, so to speak, and the tools, but takes care of framing the full operation, documenting it. This is what happens most of the time in my case here. I do the documentation of everything because engineers don't always document their work. I mean, some do, and very well, but others are extremely skilled and they don't want to do a full report with documentation. So you're going to do this on behalf of them somehow. So it's really a matter of supervision and framing the thing. And also this, Andreas was also saying this about being on the two sides with the museum, because I think it's also a lot a matter of language. Like you're going to speak the right language of the engineer and you're going to be able to translate it for the museum so that the things are understandable for the head collection and collection managers. And I think this is the main thing that is needed, even if sometimes engineers have worked completely independently from museums, and it can be also very fluent, but it's always better if there is a conservator who does this supervision and coordination.
It's like an architect when you are building a house. It's the same. So you have one person overseeing everything and being kind of a translator and director for every single small part of the artworks, or for the electrician, for the CAT guy, for another specialist, for the software people, and so on, and being the one who is kind of directing everyone in the right direction, and then make the documentation, as Alex said.
我的问题是重点是说，像台湾现在快要不见的电视像，大家应该都知道台北有电视像，然后他们或是说其他一些城市里面有一些在修电视的这种小店。那好奇是因为像刚刚 Alex 有提到说，他们找了这样子类型的一个工程师来去维修 CRT 电视。那我的意思是说，以他的经验来讲，可不可以分享 怎么样跟他们做合作，或是怎么样把他们拉进来，跟我们一起来维护这样子类型的作品。对，
好，那针对子权的提问也很快速的做总结。刚刚 Alex 先提到说，像他自己本身在跟这样子类型的工程师合作的时候，其实他就会在旁边做很仔细的档案化的文件化的一些步骤的记录，因为并不是所有的工程师都是很善于做记录的。那少部分的有，但是绝大多数的是不会，所以对他来说，他的工作就是很重要的做这件事情，以及像 Andres 有提到的说，怎么能够去理解工程师的语言，说工程师能够理解的话，然后作为那个和工程师以及和馆方的需求两者之间沟通的那个桥梁。那 Andres 接着就补充到说，其实这个就很像建筑师在盖一个房子，你要成为那个建筑师的角色，然后去完整的去看待每一个不同的细节，那来才有办法能够持续的来理解怎么跟这些工程师一起合作。OK。
你有别的问题吗？
I actually have 2 questions, and one is kind of like following with the question that haven't been answered by Andres in previously. So my question is, I think we all kind of talk about the obsolescence of the technology and also the profession of the technologies. So it's getting harder and harder to find those expertise to work with. So my question is, how do you prepare for this impact in the future? Because it is going to happen maybe based on what technology you are talking about, but it's going to be happen. Maybe the next generation or the generation next to the generation might not be able to see many of the work that we are working on right now. So the first question is, how do you prepare for that? And what's your aspects on when it has to happen? And the second question following with this is, I noticed that many kind of like curators and researchers started to have an opinions about knowing when your collection's life has ended and transformed it into a archival type of display and exhibition. And what is your point of view as a media art conservator on this type of notion? Yeah.
So the question for preparedness is, in this field, I think you can't be prepared for everything. So you have to try to have a multi-step approach so for the worst case, you have a documentation of the artwork. Just as an example, what I had in my presentation, the Namjoon Paik Empire, you should have a full video documentation of this artwork when it's running in its now functioning way. And if we at some point in time are not able to have CRTs running anymore or neon running anymore, so you would at least have a video file, hopefully well preserved, to show how it was working back then in the exhibition. And the second one, staying with that example, would be to discuss with art historians and maybe the artist studio, which is not possible anymore for Namjoon Paik, but for other artists it might be possible. How do they see their artworks in the future? What is their idea or vision? So what I didn't mention in my presentation is the search or the definition of the work defining properties. And so my company, I'm not the company by myself, I have a co-founder, Anna, and she's art historian. So we learned each other, we met at a conference at the Tate, where we became aware that we are having the same questions from different professions. She is an art historian and I as a conservator. So we are watching the same topic from different angles. And this is the way and this is again the multidisciplinary approach with these artworks. A conservator alone has not the answer 360 degree. It's just one angle and one answer, but you need other professions to find a strategy or to define a strategy for long-term preservation. So back to your question, what is the plan? There is no plan, and how can you be prepared? It's individually, you have the worst case, like documentation of the artwork. How is it behaving? How is it functioning? So it's, for software artworks, it might be even more complicated if you have old computers, old operating systems, which maybe are not able to be emulated, or interactive systems which are not working again in 5 years or in 10 years when the servers they are connecting to are not live anymore, or the language has changed, the programming language has changed. So a proper documentation of the behavior and the look and feel of the artwork would always be the worst case preparedness, and then you try to find the next steps to an ideal state. And this is maybe already the answer to your second question, where I maybe did something, got something wrong, but I understood that you were referring to an experience that some curators are seeing their collection as an archival collection. I don't think that this is.
No, I'm asking about like some artwork, if some technology is really essential for the authenticity of the work, and then in the future that technology no longer exists, then some curator would say that we have to define when is the end of the life of that work.
Yeah. Well, as people die, artworks can die as well. That's my position. So when the core equipment of an artwork is not working anymore, so a pike without CRT monitors, is this really a pike? I don't know. So at some point, I think you should be very careful when you stop emulation. So in a CRT monitor, in the case, you could construct a small projector trying to mimic a CRT system, but it depends on the look and feel. So maybe some artworks die. It's the same or more with internet-based arts, because they is maybe even more complex to maintain or to preserve, or app-based artworks. And they are dying.
And in the end, the documentation answer you're mentioning is the only one, even for the CRTs, because even if you can imagine, like I've been discussing this a lot with engineers during the zappings on study, like the Pico projector solution and the LCD panel inside. And actually, to summarize the conclusions of each of these talks, all this is unsatisfying solutions. And in any case, it will not solve the problem you were mentioning for the pike, for instance, when it's the magnetism of the deflector of the CRT that is involved. You just cannot do anything, and that's it. Like you can trick as much as you want with illusionism, it's not gonna do a better job than documentation in the end. So I think documentation is from far the best answer to all of this.
Okay, I'll try to do a summarize for translation. 那我刚刚主要是问说，因为其实今天一直不断有在提到技术代换，然后相关技术的专业人员也越来越稀少这件事情。那到底第一个是他们会怎么对这件事情做准备，然后第二个是当这件事情发生的时候，其实现在也越来越多的策展人或者说艺术史的相关的研究者，他们会提到说一件作品也有它死亡的时候，那他们各自是怎么看待这件事情，作为一位保存维护师。那首先其实他们都有提到说 做详细的记录这件事情。那其实前面 Andres 是用到 the worst case， 就是你最低限度，甚至是你最差，就是必须要完成这件事情，就是做详细的记录。那以他的白南准的案例来说的话，他一定会为这件作品做一个完整的影片的记录，导致说即使之后不管是 CRT 或是霓虹灯坏掉了，你至少还有这个从头到尾的他全部播放完的这个影片的记录能够来做观看跟展出。那但是如果遇到的是譬如说软体艺术，它要记录的东西就更多了，你的电脑的环境啊，然后这个软体跟观众互动的一些行为等等的要记录的东西就越来越多，越来越复杂。那对他来说他提到他所开设的这间公司并不是他自己一个人，有另外一位本身是比较属于艺术史的这样子的研究者是跟他一起运作这个公司。那所以他们两个人就是会发现说，其实他作为一位保存维护师，然后另外一个他的伙伴作为艺术史学家，其实是从不同的角度在看待作品的保存的状态，以及另外回答那个什么时候终结的等等这样子的问题。所以他一直觉得说并不是只是保存维护师一个人的角度来看待这件事，要不断的跟相关领域的人员有一些讨论，然后能够以记录的档案也就是 document 作为一个最起点的出发，然后在每一个当下去找到最适合那个时候的一个状态。对。然后看一下我的笔记，子璇要补充吗？对，然后对，刚刚 Andres 有说，对他来说，一个针对第二个问题比较简单的回答就是，既然人都会死亡了，那作品也是会死亡，这个是很正常的一件事情。那确实就是做记录这件事是唯一对这两个提问的回答，唯一的回答。We still have 5 minutes left. I think if our audience don't have any question or any comments, welcome the last question.
Maybe just a really quick question, and Andreas, you started to touch on this. I'm quite interested in your opinions and experience with code-based work, like real-time media or interactive media. Like, what's in your experience, and to all of the panelists, like, what are the expectations of galleries and curators with regards to acquiring work like that? Is the expectation that it comes with dedicated hardware and to conserve it, it's about conserving the hardware, or is there an expectation that software should be able to run in different contexts on different hardware, and that is that a matter of what's the word? Like, do they expect some technical support from the production studio, from the artist, with regards to that exhibiting that work in future, and for how long into the future? Yeah. Thank you.
Can you all online? Can you all both hear the question? Clear?
I'm not quite sure. You're referring to software-based artworks, right? Or what?
Yeah.
So I think the first question would be talking to the artists or the studios, because I think when they are defining that the hardware is part of the artwork, then the question is also already answered. But when they are considering the code and the functionality is the artwork, then it's depending on the museum's direction and decision. And again, the question for curators and conservators is the acquired artwork maybe the computer plus the software, or is it just a computer which was popular in this period of time, but it could also be another one. It doesn't need to be an iMac, or it doesn't need to be a Dell computer or whatever. But I think the first question would be, having an interview with the artist to learn more about the idea and how the artist describes its art, the artwork itself. And then for software-based artworks, I'm quite sure that this is the most complex thing, especially when you see it when it's relying on special hardware like VR artworks. They need these goggles and they need controllers and they need complex graphic cards in the computers. So the early versions. So this might be a nightmare in the end to preserve, and then even 5 years can be a problem. But if it's just an easy artwork running on a server, can be displayed on various displays when it's responsive designed, it maybe can last forever, resting on a blockchain, whatever, and then being accessible for the rest of the days as long as you have the computers running. But for very dedicated or relying on dedicated hardware, it could be really a nightmare. So I have one example in my recent work. It's from Fengmeng Bo, Long March. It's relying on a special kind of graphic cards, which are not produced anymore. And when you don't have these graphic cards, it's getting really hard to keep the artwork alive.
Okay. 好，那我很快的 do the translation。那刚刚这位观众主要是问到说，关于软体艺术这样的作品，通常当一个艺廊或者是说美术馆在收藏它的时候，一个是出于什么样子的动机，那以及通常怎么去收藏它，以及评估它后续的展览的一些相关的需求和保存的需求。然后刚刚 Andres 的回答是说，首先第一个是你需要去做艺术家的访谈。那在做艺术家访谈，他有提到说，有时候可能你需要先去理解说，到底今天美术馆收藏这件作品只是它的电脑的部分呢，还是他重视的是它的coding， 也就是软体程式生成的那个部分。那因为一个软体艺术作品通常要出来是要包含硬体的部分跟软体的部分，然后一起运作，你才有办法去做展示嘛。那这个时候要透过艺术家的访谈去了解说，他在硬体的部分到底是非常专属的呢，还是说其实任何一台符合特定规格的电脑都有办法完成这件事情。然后再来也就是他的软体的 coding 的这个部分。那当然现在提到的既然是软体艺术，其实也就是所有的我们都认为它是最复杂的一个东西。那它复杂的程度，它就提到例如说像是虚拟实境这样子的，它甚至可能在你购藏之后的3年到5年，它马上就会遇到重现然后保存等等相关的一个问题，因为毕竟它的这个硬体的设备等等都是非常的限定的一个状态。然后但是呢，相对之下，如果我们一样在谈软体艺术，谈的是一个只要放在一个云端伺服器上，然后在一个适当的环境当中，然后封闭式的一种运作方式的话，那其实这就非常的简单，甚至是他刚刚提到我们把它丢到那个区块链现在很红的 NFT 上面，然后或许就可以透过网址连接的方式让大家一直不断的去看到。那他刚刚也提到了一个他自己实际上有遇到的一个案例，是作品的名称叫做 Long March。那件作品它本身必须要使用特定的绘图卡，那所以如果那个绘图卡根据他刚刚所讲，这个绘图卡目前已经没有在生产了。那根据我本人所知，这件作品有非常多大的美术馆在典藏，然后也有列为常设的展览。那所以只要之后这件他们在使用的绘图卡渐渐的坏掉，然后也购藏不到以后，那这件作品的展示就会变得非常的麻烦。1 minute over 6 o'clock. So thank you everyone for the audience on site and our speakers online and also some audience online. Okay. So today's symposium ended now, and thank you all for participating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day.
you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye. Bye bye.